The trappers gathered at the Snake River camp in June 1839 couldn't stop laughing at what Tomás Navarro was carving from a willow branch. While every experienced fisherman in Idaho Territory was setting nets, checking trap lines and using proven methods to catch the salmon run, this Spanish trapper was whittling a thin wooden pole with a carved point. No metal tip, no barbs, just sharpened wood, barely 6 feet long, with some kind of cord wrapped around one end. "That's your fishing gear?" Bill Crawford asked, barely containing his laughter. "A stick is fishing spear," Tomás replied in his accented English, very effective. "A spear? For salmon? You can't spear salmon from the bank. They're too fast, too deep. That's why we use nets." "I do not fish from bank, fish from water." The other trappers exchanged glances. "You're going to wade into the Snake River during the spring run and try to stab salmon with a pointy stick?" Yes, is traditional Basque method. Works very well. Crawford shook his head. "That's the dumbest fishing method I've ever heard. You'll spend all day in the water and catch nothing while our nets bring in hundreds of pounds." By the end of the first week, Tomás had caught 340 pounds of salmon using his tiny wooden spear. The combined total from all 6 nets, operated by the other trappers, 280 pounds. His simple carved pole with its specialized technique was outfishing every piece of modern fishing gear in camp, and he was doing it with a method that was over 2,000 years old, brought from the Basque country of Spain, where his ancestors had perfected the art of spearfishing in fast-moving rivers. Tomás Navarro was 41 years old when he arrived in Idaho Territory in the spring of 1839. He'd emigrated from the Basque region of northern Spain 5 years earlier, worked briefly in the Atlantic fishing industry, then pushed west, seeking opportunity in the fur trade. But Tomás carried knowledge that extended far beyond trapping. He came from a culture where river fishing with specialized spears had been refined over millennia. The Basque people had inhabited the rivers and coasts of northern Spain and southern France for thousands of years. They'd developed fishing techniques that were remarkably sophisticated, particularly for catching fish in fast-moving water. One of these techniques was txitxarro fishing, using a specially designed throwing spear to catch fish from within the river itself. The technique wasn't simply standing on a bank and throwing a stick at fish. It was a complete system, reading the water to find where fish held in the current, understanding fish behavior during spawning runs, positioning yourself in the river to minimize your shadow and vibration, and using a precisely balanced spear that was thrown with a specific motion to penetrate the water effectively. When Tomás arrived at the Snake River camp and saw the salmon run beginning, he immediately recognized an opportunity. These fish were behaving exactly like the salmon in Basque rivers, holding in predictable locations, moving in patterns he understood. He could catch them using the method his grandfather had taught him, the method his family had used for generations. His fellow trappers thought he was insane when he explained what he planned to do. Tomás began by selecting wood for his spear. He walked along the riverbank, examining willow trees, looking for specific characteristics. He needed a branch that was straight, about 6 feet long, and approximately 1 inch in diameter at the base, tapering to 3/4 of an inch at the tip. The wood needed to be green, recently cut, so it would be flexible and heavy rather than dry and light. Bill Crawford watched him cutting branches. "Why willow? And why green wood? Dry wood would be lighter, easier to throw. Dry wood floats too much, bends wrong in water. Green willow has weight, stays straight when thrown into current, is better. You're overthinking this. Just sharpen any stick and throw it." But Tomás was meticulous. He selected 3 branches, examined them carefully, kept one, and discarded the others. The chosen branch was straight to within a 1/4 inch over its 6-foot length, had minimal side branches, and had a natural taper that created proper balance. Back at camp, Tomás began shaping the spear. He stripped the bark completely, then used his knife to carefully shape the tip. The point wasn't simply whittled to a sharp cone like you'd make for stabbing. Instead, Tomás carved a specific profile, a gradual taper over the last 8 inches, ending in a point that was sharp but not needle-fine. "Why not make it sharper?" Crawford asked. "Too sharp breaks when hit stone. This point is strong enough to penetrate fish, not so thin it breaks. Also, see here." Tomás showed the carved grooves he'd made near the point. "These grooves let water flow past, reduces resistance when spear enters water." Crawford thought that was absurd. "Water resistance? You're throwing a stick, not building a boat." But Tomás continued his precise work. He carved 4 shallow grooves, running lengthwise along the last 12 inches of the spear, spiraling slightly. These grooves would channel water and reduce drag when the spear entered the river at speed. The most unusual feature was what Tomás added near the butt end of the spear. He carved a groove around the circumference about 4 inches from the end, then wrapped cordage tightly around this groove. The cord was made from twisted sinew, wrapped many times to create a bulge about 1.5 inches in diameter. "What's that for?" a trapper named Henderson asked. "Is for throwing. Cord gives grip, adds weight to back of spear, makes balance correct." "Balance? It's a throwing spear. You just chuck it?" "No. Must throw with precise motion. Balance is critical. Cord wrap also protects wood from splitting when hand releases." The other trappers watched this elaborate preparation with amusement. Tomás was spending hours carving and perfecting a fishing spear, while they simply set their nets and waited for fish to swim into them. His method seemed absurdly labor-intensive for uncertain results. When Tomás finally declared his spear ready, it looked deceptively simple: a 6-foot willow pole carved to a gradual point with grooves near the tip, and a wrap of cord near the base. No metal, no barbs, no obvious sophistication, just shaped wood. "That's what you've spent 2 days making?" Crawford said. "A pointy stick with string on it?" "See, is ready now. We've caught 40 pounds of fish while you've been whittling. Our nets are working fine. Your nets catch fish that swim into them. I will catch fish that I choose." Crawford laughed. "Good luck with that." Early the next morning, Tomás waded into the Snake River, carrying his spear. The water was cold, snowmelt from the mountains, and the current was strong. The spring salmon run was in full force, with fish moving upstream to spawn. The river was perhaps 80 feet wide at this point, with depths ranging from 2 to 5 feet. The trappers on the bank watched with curiosity. Tomás waded carefully, feeling for footing on the rocky bottom. He moved slowly, creating minimal disturbance. When he reached a point about 20 feet from the bank where the water was waist-deep, he stopped. He stood completely still for several minutes, just watching the water. The current flowed past him at perhaps 3 miles per hour. From the bank, it was impossible to see any fish. The water was slightly turbid from spring runoff. Then Tomás moved. His motion was sudden and fluid. He drew the spear back past his shoulder, took 1 step forward, and threw it in a single, coordinated motion. The spear flew about 15 feet, entered the water at a steep angle, and disappeared. Tomás waded forward quickly, reached into the water, and lifted the spear. A salmon, perhaps 8 pounds, was impaled just behind the head. The fish was still thrashing. Tomás waded to the bank, removed the fish from the spear, and placed it in a basket. The entire sequence, from throw to landing the fish, had taken perhaps 30 seconds. "Lucky throw," Crawford muttered. But he was watching now with more attention. Tomás waded back to his spot. Again he stood still, watching the water. 2 minutes later, he threw again. Another fish, this one perhaps 10 pounds. He brought it to the bank and returned to his position. Over the next hour, Tomás caught 11 salmon. The smallest was 6 pounds, the largest was 14 pounds. His success rate was remarkable. He threw the spear perhaps 16 times and landed 11 fish. Each throw appeared deliberate, aimed at a specific target that only Tomás could see. By midday, the trapper's mockery had turned to baffled observation. Tomás had caught over 60 pounds of salmon in 4 hours. The 6 nets they'd set the previous evening had caught perhaps 40 pounds total overnight. "How are you seeing the fish?" Henderson finally asked. "Is not difficult if you know what to look for. Fish hold in current in predictable places, behind rocks, in seams where fast water meets slow water. They face upstream, holding position. You learn to see the shadow, the movement, the shape. I don't see anything but murky water. Is because you look at surface, must look through surface into water. Eyes must adjust. Also, position of sun matters. Morning light from behind shows fish better. And you can throw accurately at something underwater? Water refracts light. Fish appears to be higher than actual position. Must aim lower than where fish seems to be. Is adjustment you learn with practice." Crawford was calculating. "You're catching bigger fish than our nets. And you're selective. You're only taking mature fish. Our nets catch everything." "See, spearfishing allows choice. I see fish, decide if size is good, then throw. Net takes whatever enters. Many small fish in net are too young, should be released, but are dead already." This was true. The trappers' nets were efficient at catching fish, but indiscriminate. They'd caught several dozen small salmon that were not yet mature, fish that should have been allowed to spawn, but were dead from net entanglement. Tomás's method caught only the fish he targeted, typically mature adults of good size. What the trappers were witnessing was a sophisticated hunting technique refined over thousands of years. Spearfishing in fast-moving water requires understanding several physical and biological principles. First, refraction and aiming. Light bends when it passes from water to air. A fish underwater appears to be about 25% shallower than its actual depth. An experienced spear fisherman automatically compensates, aiming lower than the apparent fish position. Tomás had learned this through thousands of throws starting in childhood. His brain calculated the refraction correction instantly and unconsciously. Second, spear design and water penetration. When a spear enters water at speed, it experiences significant drag that can deflect its path. Tomás's grooved design channeled water flow along the shaft, reducing lateral deflection. The gradual taper allowed the spear to pierce the surface cleanly, rather than slapping and losing energy. The weight distribution, slightly heavier toward the back due to the cord wrap, kept the point forward as it penetrated. Third, reading the water. Salmon in fast current hold in specific locations where they can maintain position without exhausting themselves. These locations are predictable: the downstream side of large rocks, where current is reduced; seams where fast and slow water meet; depressions in the riverbed where water is slightly deeper. Tomás had learned to read surface water patterns and correlate them with bottom structure and fish-holding locations. Fourth, minimizing disturbance. Fish have lateral lines that detect vibration and pressure changes. Wading creates disturbance, but slow, deliberate movement minimizes it. Tomás positioned himself downstream of where he was fishing, so any disturbance he created flowed away from the fish. He stood still for minutes between throws, allowing his presence to become part of the background. Fifth, throwing mechanics. Tomás's throw wasn't a simple overhand chuck. It was a coordinated whole-body motion. Step forward with the left foot while the right arm extended back, then rotate the torso while driving the right arm forward, releasing the spear at the moment of maximum velocity. The motion was similar to throwing a javelin, generating substantial force from legs, core, and shoulder working in sequence. The trappers saw a man throwing a stick at fish. What was actually happening was an expert hunter applying complex learned skills, reading underwater terrain from surface patterns, calculating refraction corrections automatically, throwing with practiced mechanics, and using a tool that was optimized through generations of refinement. By the third day, the disparity in catch was becoming impossible to ignore. Tomás had caught 180 pounds of salmon. The 6 nets had caught 140 pounds combined. One man with a wooden spear was outfishing 6 men with modern equipment. Crawford decided to try the spear method himself. "Let me use your spear. I'll try it." Tomás handed it over. Crawford waded into the river, positioned himself approximately where Tomás usually stood, and waited. After a few minutes, he saw what he thought was a fish, or maybe a shadow, and threw the spear. The spear entered the water at a shallow angle, deflected off the current, and drifted downstream. Crawford retrieved it and tried again. This time he threw more steeply, but the spear hit the river bottom and stuck. He pulled it free, examined the point, slightly damaged, and returned to the bank. "I can't see the fish clearly enough to hit them." "Is practice," Tomás said. "I begin learning when I am 7 years old. My grandfather teaches me. Takes many years to become accurate." "How many throws did it take you to catch your first fish?" Tomás smiled. "Many hundreds. First summer, I catch nothing for weeks. Then 1 fish, then slowly more. By age 12, I am proficient. By age 16, I am expert." Crawford did the math. "You've been doing this for over 30 years? See, in Basque country is common skill for boys near rivers. Some become very expert. I am good, not the best, but good enough." The other trappers tried as well. Henderson managed to hit 1 fish over 2 days of attempts, but the spear didn't penetrate deeply enough, and the fish escaped. Another trapper, Morrison, spent 6 hours trying and never hit a fish at all. The skill barrier was enormous. Tomás made it look simple, but his success was built on decades of practice starting from childhood. The trappers were attempting in days what took years to learn. Their failure only made Tomás's consistent success more impressive. By the end of the first week of the salmon run, the results were documented. The trappers kept careful records of catch weights for trading purposes. Tomás, with his wooden spear, 340 pounds of salmon, 6 nets operated by other trappers, 280 pounds combined. One man with Stone Age technology had outfished 6 men with modern nets. The salmon Tomás caught averaged larger size, 8 to 12 pounds versus 6 to 9 pounds for net caught fish. His catch was more valuable per pound because the fish were in better condition, not damaged by net entanglement. The efficiency was even more stark when calculated per labor hour. Tomás fished approximately 4 to 5 hours per day. The nets required setting, checking multiple times daily, clearing, resetting, perhaps 2 hours of labor per net per day, 12 hours total labor for the 6 nets. Tomás, 340 pounds with approximately 35 labor hours. March, 9.7 pounds per labor hour. Nets, 280 pounds with approximately 84 labor hours. Sure, 3.3 pounds per labor hour. His efficiency was 3 times higher per unit of labor invested, and his capital cost was zero. He'd made his spear from materials gathered freely. The nets had cost perhaps $30 combined to purchase. Crawford finally acknowledged the obvious. Your method is better than ours, at least for this situation. For salmon run in clear, fast river, see, spear is better. For other situations, net may be better. Each method has correct application. Will you teach us, or at least teach us the basics? I can teach, but will take much time to become proficient, is not simple skill. Over the following days, Tomás conducted informal training sessions. He taught the trappers how to make proper spears, the wood selection, the carving technique, the importance of balance. He explained what to look for in the water, how to interpret shadows and shapes, how to estimate depth. He demonstrated throwing mechanics, breaking down the motion into components that could be practiced. The trappers improved slightly, but none approached Tomás's proficiency. After 2 weeks of practice, Henderson had managed to catch 6 fish total. Morrison had caught 3. Crawford gave up entirely and returned to using nets. It's too hard, Crawford admitted. I don't have the patience to stand in cold water for hours, waiting for a glimpse of a fish. I'm probably going to miss anyway. Sea is not for everyone, Tomás agreed. Is specialized skill, requires certain temperament, patience, focus, willingness to spend long time learning. Beyond the catch efficiency, Tomás's method had a conservation advantage that the trappers eventually recognized. Nets were indiscriminate. They caught everything that entered them. During the salmon run, this meant many immature fish were caught and killed unnecessarily. These young fish, typically 2 to 4 pounds, would have been better left alive to grow larger and spawn in future years. Tomás only targeted mature adults, typically 8 pounds and larger. He could see the fish clearly before throwing and made conscious decisions about whether to attempt a catch. If a fish looked undersized, he simply didn't throw. If a female looked particularly large and likely to produce many eggs, he sometimes chose not to target her, allowing that genetics to pass to the next generation. You're practicing selective harvest, Henderson observed. Like good forestry, take the mature trees, leave the young ones to grow. Is same principle. River is resource that must be managed. Take too many small fish, future catches suffer. Take only mature fish, population stays healthy. This wasn't environmental consciousness in the modern sense. Tomás wasn't thinking about ecosystems or sustainability as concepts, but his culture's fishing practices had evolved over thousands of years, and cultures that overfished their rivers didn't survive. The successful fishing cultures were those that developed practices that allowed fish populations to persist. Selective harvest was embedded in Tomás's methods because methods that killed indiscriminately had failed over the centuries. The nets used by American trappers were newly introduced to the region. They were efficient for immediate catch, but hadn't been tested for long-term sustainability. The Basque spear fishing technique had been tested for 2,000 years. If it damaged fish populations, the Basque people would have abandoned it centuries earlier. The salmon run peaked in early June, then gradually declined through the month. By June 30th, the run was essentially complete. The trappers tallied their total catch for the month. Tomás, with his wooden spear, won 340 pounds of salmon, 6 nets combined, 1,120 pounds of salmon. Over the full month, Tomás had outfished all the nets by 220 pounds, nearly 20% more catch. His catch averaged larger fish in better condition. The value of his catch was perhaps 25–30% higher than the net caught fish once size and quality were factored in. The trappers who'd mocked his tiny wooden spear as a stupid stick were now asking him to make spears for them. Several offered to pay him for training. Recognizing that the skill had genuine commercial value, Tomás made several spears for others, taking payment in trade goods. But he also explained the limitations. Spear is excellent tool for this situation. Clear water, predictable fish behavior, experienced fishermen. But if water is murky, if fish do not hold in current, if fisherman is not skilled, then net is better choice. Must use correct tool for situation. This nuanced understanding that different methods suited different contexts was lost on some trappers who now wanted to abandon nets entirely. But Tomás was right that spear fishing required specific conditions and skills. In slower, murkier water, nets would likely outperform spears. During times of year when salmon weren't running in predictable patterns, nets would catch more fish. The spear's advantage was in the specific context of the spring salmon run, clear, fast water, fish holding in predictable locations, and critically, a fisherman with decades of practice. Remove any of these elements, and the advantage diminished. As word spread along the Snake River, other trappers and settlers came to observe Tomás's technique. By July, At least a dozen men were attempting spearfishing, with varying success. 2 men, both young enough to learn new motor skills easily and patient enough to practice extensively, became moderately proficient. They weren't approaching Tomás's catch rates, but they were catching enough fish that the method was worthwhile for them. An interesting cultural exchange emerged. A Shoshone man who'd been observing the trappers approached Tomás and demonstrated a spear fishing technique used by his people. The Shoshone method was similar in principles but different in details. They used shorter, heavier spears, often with bone points, and fished from canoes rather than wading. The techniques had converged on similar solutions: specialized spears, selective targeting, reading water patterns, despite being developed independently. Tomás and the Shoshone fishermen spent several days fishing together, comparing methods. Tomás adopted one element of the Shoshone technique, using a wrist loop on the spear that allowed for easier retrieval if a throw missed. The Shoshone man adopted Tomás's grooved spear design, recognizing that it reduced water resistance. This cross-cultural exchange illustrated how specialized knowledge accumulates. Both the Basque and Shoshone cultures had developed sophisticated spearfishing techniques through centuries of practice. Neither was clearly superior. They were optimized for slightly different conditions and materials, but both were far superior to the improvised methods the American trappers had attempted. Tomás Navarro continued fishing the Snake River each spring through 1847. When he was 51, he caught between 1,200 and 1,500 pounds of salmon annually, selling or trading the catch in addition to his trapping income. The revenue from salmon fishing became a significant part of his livelihood, eventually surpassing his fur trapping income. He taught spearfishing to 7 men who showed aptitude and dedication. 3 of these became proficient enough to catch 400–600 pounds per season. The technique never became widespread. It required too much skill and dedication for most trappers, but it persisted as a specialized method practiced by a small number of experts. The Basque fishing spear design influenced later developments. By the 1860s, commercial fishermen in the Pacific Northwest were using spears for salmon fishing that incorporated elements of Tomás's design: grooved shafts for reduced water resistance, balanced weight distribution, and gradual taper. Some added metal points, which improved durability but didn't fundamentally change the effectiveness. Modern sport spearfishing, which developed in the early 1900s with the invention of rubber-powered spear guns, follows different principles because the equipment is mechanically powered. But traditional spearfishing, as Tomás practiced it, continued in some areas into the mid-1900s. The last documented practitioner of Basque-style salmon spearfishing in Idaho was a man who learned from someone who'd learned from Tomás, the knowledge transmitted through just one intermediate generation. Tomás Navarro died in 1871 at age 73 in a small settlement in Oregon Territory, where he'd retired after his fishing and trapping career ended. His obituary, brief and unremarkable, made no mention of his fishing expertise. The wooden spear that had outfished every net in camp didn't survive. It was just shaped wood, not worth preserving after Tomás stopped using it. But the lesson survived. Bill Crawford, who'd initially mocked Tomás's tiny wooden spear, wrote in an 1852 letter to his family back east, "I once laughed at a Spanish trapper for fishing with a sharpened stick. Then I watched him catch more fish than all of us with nets combined. I learned that summer that ancient techniques aren't necessarily primitive. Sometimes they're ancient because they work better than anything we've invented since." The trappers who witnessed Tomás's fishing in 1839 carried stories of it for the rest of their lives. Several told the story to their children and grandchildren, describing the Spanish man who outfished everyone with Stone Age technology. The stories were embellished over time. Some versions claimed Tomás never missed a throw, which wasn't true, but the core fact remained accurate. One man with a carved wooden spear caught more fish than 6 men with modern nets. The catch numbers were documented in Trading Post records. The Fort Hall Ledger for June 1839 shows T. Navarro, salmon, 1340 lbs, and Crawford plus others, salmon, net catch, 1120 lbs. The disparity was real, recorded in the dry language of commercial record-keeping. Everyone mocked Tomás Navarro's tiny wooden spear. They called it a pointy stick, a stupid tool, a waste of time. They laughed at the idea of wading into a fast river and throwing wood at fish. They knew that nets were the proper, modern, effective method for catching salmon in bulk. Then the tiny wooden spear caught 1,140 pounds of salmon in 1 month. It outfished every net in camp. It did so using a technique that was over 2,000 years old, brought from Basque country, where Tomás's ancestors had refined it through countless generations. The mockery turned to respect, then to requests for training, then to admiration for expertise they couldn't replicate even after weeks of trying. The story isn't about technology. The spear was simpler than the nets. It's about skill, about specialized knowledge refined over Centuries about the difference between owning equipment and mastering a technique. Anyone could buy a net. Only someone who'd devoted years to practice could fish like Tomás. Sometimes the tiniest tool in the most skilled hands outperforms the most advanced equipment in average hands. And sometimes what everyone mocks as primitive is actually the result of sophistication they don't understand.